welcome back to the second chapter of Momo. This is a really beautiful story that I read a few years ago, and I think it's got such a great message for these times. And I'm reading it as a way to link with you all and hopefully bring some comfort in these interesting and quite difficult times. I hope wherever you are that you're doing okay, and sending you lots of love. So, are you ready for a story? Are you sitting comfortably? Sorry, I can't hear you. Are you sitting comfortably?
I'm so comfortable. I'm almost not here. But yes, thank you, I am.
Got my storytelling ears on. Then I'll begin. Momo was comfortably off from now on, at least in her own estimation. She always had something to eat, sometimes more and sometimes less, depending on the circumstances and what people could spare. She had a roof over her head, she had a bed to sleep in, and she could make herself a fire when it was cold. Most important of all, she had acquired a host of good friends. You may think that Momo had simply been fortunate to come across such friendly people. This was precisely what Momo herself thought, but it soon dawned on her neighbours that they had been no less fortunate. She became so important to them that they wondered how they had ever managed without her in the past. And the longer she stayed with them, the more indispensable she became. So indispensable, in fact, that their one fear was that she might someday move on. The result was that Momo received a stream of visitors. She was almost always to be seen with someone sitting beside her, talking earnestly, and those who needed her but couldn't come themselves would send for her instead. As for those who needed her but hadn't yet realized it, the others used to tell them, "Why not go and see Momo?" In time, these words became a stock phrase for the local inhabitants, just as they said, "All the best," or "So long," or "Heaven only knows." So they took to saying on all sorts of occasions, "Why not go and see Momo?" Was Momo so incredibly bright that she always gave good advice? Or found the right words to console people in need of consolation? Or delivered fair and far-sighted opinions on their problems? Nope, she was no more capable of that than anyone else her age. So, could she do things that put people in a good mood? Could she sing like a bird or play an instrument? Given that she lived in a kind of circus, could she dance or do acrobatics? Nope, it wasn't any of these either. Was she a witch then? Did she know some magic spell that would drive away troubles and cares? Could she read a person's palm or foretell the future in some way or other? No, what Momo was better at than anyone else was listening. Yep, listening. She listened in a way that made a slow-witted person have flashes of inspiration. It wasn't that she actually said anything or asked questions that put such ideas into their heads. She simply sat there and listened with the utmost attention and sympathy, fixing them with her big dark eyes, and they suddenly became aware of ideas who existed they'd never suspected. Momo could listen in such a way that worried and indecisive people knew their own minds from one moment to the next, or shy people felt suddenly confident and at ease, or downhearted people felt happy and hopeful. And if someone felt that his life had been an utter failure, and that he himself was only one among millions of wholly unimportant people who could be replaced as easily as broken window panes, he would go and pour out his heart to Momo. And even as he spoke, he would come to realize by some mysterious means that he was absolutely wrong, that there was only one person like himself in the whole world, and that consequently he mattered to the world in his own peculiar way. Such was Momo's talent of listening. You guys are doing good too. One day, Momo received a visit from two close neighbours who had quarrelled violently and weren't on speaking terms. Their friends had urged them to go and see Momo, because it didn't do good for neighbours to live at daggers drawn. After objecting at first, the two men had reluctantly agreed. One of them was the bricklayer who had built Momo's stove and painted the pretty flower picture on her wall. Salvatore by name, he was a strapping fellow with big black moustache that curled up at the ends. The other, Nino, was skinny and always looked tired. Nino ran a small inn on the outskirts of town, largely patronised by a handful of old men who spent the entire evening reminiscing over one glass of wine. Nino and his plump wife, Laliana, were also friends of Momo's and had often brought her good things to eat. So there the two men sat, one on either side of the stone arena, silently scowling at nothing in particular. When Momo saw how angry with each other they were, she couldn't decide which one of them to approach first. Rather than offend either of them, she sat down midway between them on the edge of the arena and looked at each in turn, waiting to see what would happen. Lots of things take time, and time was Momo's only form of wealth. After the two of them had sat there in silence for minutes on end, Salvatore abruptly stood up. "I'm off," he announced. "I've shown my goodwill by coming here, but the man's as stubborn as a mule, Momo. You can see that for yourself." And he turned on his heel. "Goodbye and good riddance," Nino called after him. "You needn't have bothered to come in the first place. I wouldn't make it up with a vicious brute like you." Salvatore swung around, puce with rage. "Who's a vicious brute?" he demanded menacingly, retracing his steps. "Say that again, I dare you." "As often as you like," yelled Nino. "I suppose you think you're too big and tough for anyone to speak the truth to your face. Well, I will. To you and anyone else that cares to listen. That's right. Come here and murder me the way you tried the other day." "I wish I had," roared Salvatore, clutching his fists. "There you are, Momo. You see the dirty lies he tells. All I did was take him by the scruff of the neck and dunk him in the pool of slops behind that lousy inn of his. You couldn't even drown a rat in that." Redressing himself to Nino, he shouted, "Yes, you're still alive and kicking, worse luck." Insults flew thick and fast after that, and for a while Momo was at a loss to know what it was all about and why the pair of them were so furious with each other. It transpired by degrees that Salvatore's only reason for assaulting Nino was that Nino had slapped his face in the presence of some customers, though Nino counterclaimed that Salvatore had previously tried to smash all his crockery. "That's another dirty lie," Salvatore said angrily. "I only threw a jug at the wall, and that was cracked already." Maybe, Nino retorted, but it was my jug. You had no right to do such a thing. Salvatore protested that he had every right, seeing that Nino had cast aspersions on his professional skill. He turned to Momo. Know what he said about me? He said I couldn't build a wall straight because I was drunk 24 hours a day. My great-grandfather was the same, he said, and he'd helped to build the Leaning Tower of Pisa. But Salvatore, said Nino, I was only joking. Some joke, growled Salvatore. Very funny, I don't think. It then emerged that Nino had only been paying Salvatore back for another joke. He'd woken up one morning to find some words daubed on the tavern door in bright red paint. This read, "This inn is out." Quite funny. Nino had found that just as unamusing. The two of them spent some time wrangling over whose had been the better joke. Then, after working themselves up into a lather again, they broke off. Momo was staring at them wide-eyed, but neither man quite knew how to interpret her gaze. Was she secretly laughing at them, or was she sad? Although her expression gave no clue, they suddenly seemed to see themselves mirrored in her eyes and began to feel sheepish. Okay, said Salvatore. Maybe I shouldn't have painted those words on your door, Nino. But I wouldn't have done it if you had refused to serve me so much as a single glass of wine. That was against the law. You know full well. I've always paid up, and you'd no call to treat me that way. Oh, hadn't I just? Nino retorted. What about the St. Anthony business? Ah, that's floored you, hasn't it? You cheated me right, left, and centre, and wasn't going to take it lying down. I cheated you, Salvatore protested, smiting his brow. You've got the wrong way around. It was you that tried to cheat me, but you didn't succeed. The fact was, Nino had hung a picture of St. Anthony on the wall of the barroom, a clipping from an illustrated magazine which he had cut out and framed. Salvatore offered to buy this picture one day, ostensibly because he found it so beautiful. By dint of skilful haggling, Nino had persuaded Salvatore to part with a radio in exchange, laughing up his sleeve to think that Salvatore was getting the worst of the bargain. After that deal had been struck, it turned out that nestling between the picture and its cardboard backing was a banknote of which Nino had known nothing. Discovering that he had been outwitted, Nino angrily demanded the money back because it hadn't been included in the bargain. Salvatore refused to hand it over, whereupon Nino refused to serve him any more, and that was how it all began. One day they had traced their vendetta back. Once they'd traced their vendetta back to its original cause, the men fell silent for a while. Then Nino says, "Be honest, Salvatore. Did you or didn't you know about the money before we made the deal?" "Of course I knew. I wouldn't have gone through with it." "In other words, you diddled me." "What? You mean you really didn't know about the money?" "No, I swear I didn't." "There you are then. It was you that tried to diddle me, or you wouldn't have taken my radio in exchange for the worthless scrap of newsprint." "How did you know about the money?" "I saw a customer tuck it into the back as a thank you to St. Anthony a couple of nights before." Nino chewed his lips. "Was it a lot of money?" "Only what my radio was worth," said Salvatore. "I see," Nino said thoughtfully. "So that's what all this is about, a clipping from a magazine?" Salvatore scratched his head. "I guess so," he growled. "You're welcome to have it back, Nino." "Certainly not," Nino replied with dignity. "A deal's a deal. We shook hands on it, after all." Quite suddenly, they both burst out laughing. Clambering down the stone steps, they met in the middle of the grassy arena, exchanged bear hugs, and slapped each other on the back. Then they hugged Momo and thanked her profusely. When they left a few minutes later, Momo stood waving till they were out of sight. She was glad her friends had made up. Another time, a little boy brought her his canary because it wouldn't sing. Momo found that a far harder proposition. She had to sit and listen to the bird for a whole week before it started to frill and warble. Momo listened to everyone and everything, to dogs and cats, crickets and tortoises, even to the rain and the wind in the pine trees, and all of them spoke to her after their own fashion. Many were the evening when, after her friends had gone home, she would sit by herself in the middle of the old stone amphitheatre, with the sky's starry vault overhead, and simply listen to the great silence around her. Whenever she did this, she felt she was sitting at the centre of a giant ear, listening to the whole of the stars, and she seemed to hear soft but majestic music that touched her heart in the strangest way. On nights like these, she always had the most beautiful dreams. Those who still think that listening isn't art, those that still think that listening isn't an art, should see if they can do it half as well. That's really beautiful. Okay, that's the end of chapter 2. I hope you enjoyed that, and I look forward to reading you chapter 3. I hope you're enjoying this and looking after yourself wherever you are. Take care.
Thank you very, very much.
Stay connected.